constantly highlight the importance of looking at budgets and funding for our schools. Why is this so important, and specifically tied to Worcester?
Yeah, really what I learned, particularly in Worcester, because of the tightness of our budget and the lack of resources, is that a lot of what goes on, and arguably everything that goes on in one way or another, can be traced back to budget scarcity. That sort of tradition of lack of dollars that gets people into a mindset that we don't have enough. We as a system start to expect that things won't get fixed. I think that that gets us maybe a little bit more stuck than maybe even we need to be.
And is that like a city question, or is that a state question? Who makes this the final decision?
Yeah, the bigger issue there is a state issue. Worcester is one of the communities that is primarily state funded. So we need to be actually having the statewide fight over funding. At the same time, we need to be budgeting in a way that says we recognize the kind of system that we are, and we need to make sure that we're allocating resources in ways that make the best use of those for the kids that we're serving.
Do you ever think that we get the budget we do based on the performance we give regarding so many metrics?
We don't, because those two things aren't actually tied. I do think, though, that we get the budget we do and the gateways get the budget we do, and it has taken this long to get any changes because of who's in our school system.
How do you feel about the current climate between the Worcester public schools and a lot of the communities in Worcester?
It's broken, which is a sad thing to say. We've shifted now over the last number of years to a student population in which 59% of our students are first language other than English. So this is no longer a sort of side English language learner issue. This is like who we are as a system. We really need to be approaching all of what we do from that perspective, because that actually is, that's who we are. That's who the Worcester Public Schools are.
And what recommendations do you have particularly to kind of tackle those issues?
There needs to be sort of an adjustment in vision, that it is as if we think we're serving a population that looks more like maybe our surrounding suburbs, with English language learners as sort of a side question and parents who don't speak English as sort of a side question, when really that has to be central to who we are. We're saying that this is important, and we're going to hold you accountable for what you're doing in that. And honestly, that ought to be happening at every school community.
I feel like a lot of those issues stems from the school committee not being, or even school, Worcester Public School leadership not being as diverse as it should be.
Sure.
So how will you tackle that if you're like one of the few voices that kind of brings that up constantly?
Yes, and also not necessarily one of the diverse voices myself. I mean, the first thing is actually to admit that that's something that's happening, which is something we haven't seen. Conversations around things like school leadership and who is being hired. But beyond that, getting into the idea that if we are proud of the fact that 100 languages are spoken in the Worcester Public Schools, when we hold a forum around budget concerns, how many languages are we hearing testimony in? You know, are we having it in a place where people can hear it? Are we giving enough time and space to those kinds of concerns?
Goes into my next question. Do you think there's a racism problem in the Worcester Public School based on the changing demographics that's been going on for years, and kind of not the change in structure on the way we do things?
We have created structures that we know to be biased. As soon as you are the person who's part of doing any kind of leadership in that, you own it, it's yours. You need to now deal with it. I see that happening in many cases as you go down through the leadership of, we're not actually even bringing in people from outside, never mind any other kind of diversity. Thus, I think other questions tend to get, honestly, not even considered, as far as I can tell.
Do you think those kind of leadership positions are being picked based on their beliefs, on the way they're going to do things?
I think it's honestly, as best as I can tell, an administration that in many cases runs on personal loyalty.
What do you think that could be done to improve the communications between the community that doesn't feel heard and oftentimes ignored and the Worcester Public Schools?
The idea that students and parents have a valid voice is the first thing. Really important is, if you're the school committee, these are your constituents and you need to be hearing from them, and that's part of what happens.
Do you think that's happening now?
That's not what's happening. You have young people who are high school students who have come to you under their First Amendment rights to petition for redress of grievances, and essentially you guys blew them off. That's not okay either. Honestly, the school committee is violating its oath. You take an oath to the Constitution of the Commonwealth and to the United States Constitution when you take your oath of office.
My next question is, you've been here before.
Yes. Yes.
What kind of pushed you to do this again, knowing the amount of work it takes and kind of the energy?
Yeah, right? So the thing that is interesting about the job that I do, so I work for the State Association of School Committees, which means that if I get called into a community, it's because somebody wants to do their job better.
Has Worcester ever asked for that?
Not in recent years.
How long has it been, if you, off the top of your head?
As far as I know, there hasn't been any kind of state professional development that Worcester has had, at least in the last 4 years, as far as I know. But it bothers me because we have the responsibility, and not just the school committee, but we as a city have the responsibility of educating 25,000 kids who are coming to us from all kinds of different experiences. The amount of responsibility that is entrusted to the Worcester Public Schools in an average school day is huge. It's enormous. And the degree of not paying attention to the important stuff that's happening on the Worcester School Committee is just appalling to me. Are you actually setting goals for the student body that you actually have, rather than one that, you know, seems to be invented in your head? We have people who have an idea in their head as to what school committee members do, which isn't actually what school committees are for. Also, if you end up with too many people who are too far removed from the student life and the actual sending kids to school life, and who aren't making a real effort to kind of get themselves steeped back in that can be really dangerous too, because I think that you lose track of what does it mean if we have policy language that says X? What does that actually do to a kid in the classroom? And that's the part that I feel like is really broken. There's really this just sort of severance between what's going on at the school committee and the experience not only my kids, but everybody's kids are having in the system.
What is the one thing you wish voters to know that they haven't asked you in any public forum?
The thing that's maybe most important about my candidacy is that relationship between policy and budget and actually being a parent. You know, going to the State House and having conversations around the foundation budget, which sounds really complicated, really matters, because it's whether or not my kid's bathroom got painted. It's whether or not, you know, my kid is actually going to have enough copies to get through the year, or is going to get new books anytime in, you know, the foreseeable future.
Do you?